Dorothy Dunnett, Game of Kings. We're at part 3, chapter 2, the Queen's progress becomes critical. I have issues, Ms. Dunnett, with the Queen getting sick, and apparently the most qualified people in the world to look after her are the ladies. Christian and Sibylla, like, how are they the most qualified people to look at? They probably don't even know how to cook their own meals. Anyway, that's okay. Just look after the Queen, who is deathly sick. Page 258, the beginning of the chapter. So, look, here we go. It was happening. We knew that Tom was keen on Christian. Sorry, this is the proposal, by the way. Tom proposing to Christian. Tom proves 2 things to us. 1, it's better to reject a person straight away rather than trying to let them down gently. And 2, Tom is the nicest person ever. Christian tries so hard to convince him that she would be a burden, that this isn't good for him. We know that Christian, the real truth as to why Christian doesn't want to get married is probably something along the lines of, I believe that she never thought she would get married, that she's quite independent, that she probably is quite happy not to be married. And also, she's just met Francis, or she's met Lymond, and he's on her mind, naturally. But not that I think that she has a mind that she would marry Lymond. I don't think that is it at all. But it is a distracting thought. You have to remember that Christian is really smart, and she gets really annoyed at herself when she realizes that she should have just said no to Tom, I'll give you an answer later, rather than try to make all these excuses, because Tom, being the wonderful and beautiful man that he seems to be on paper, he's already thought about all this, and he's already accepted any extra stuff he has to do for Christian because he genuinely thinks that she is more than worth it. And then she delays this answer, and I'm just like, why delay it? Just say no. She's just dragging him along. She should have said yes. I can see why she didn't. I genuinely thought when I was reading this and she said, I'll delay my answer, that she was going to say no. Like, there was no doubt in her heart. So it was a bit of a shock to find out that she said yes later, but we'll get to that. We do know that Christian, despite being perhaps not fancying herself as someone who would get married and a little bit distracted with Lymond at the moment, she genuinely knows that if she were to marry anyone, Tom would be the guy. And I trust Christian's judgment. So I trust that Tom is good. So I'm trusting you on this one, Christian. Right, then we go 261 onwards. My goodness. Finally, we've been waiting for this scene between Marietta and Richard for them to blow over. Richard and Marietta are both like 2 separate kettles that are just about to reach boiling point, but their lids are on, so you can't quite tell. But they both explode in this. It starts very innocently though, really. Richard is rather innocent. He accepts from his mother this concoction thing that Catherine Hunter has made that is apparently going to protect him or something like that. And he kind of just plays along with it to humour both Catherine Hunter and his mother. He's a nice son, Richard, genuinely. And you know, he did the right thing. He goes and says goodbye to Marietta. Both Marietta and Richard just completely peed me off in this entire scene because it was just poorly handled. It's so fun to sit here all superior being like, I wouldn't have said that. I would have reacted totally differently. Both of them came across as teenagers in this, I would say, especially Marietta. So it's really frustrating to read. Let me just pick apart a few things that really got to me. Middle of page 262, Richard saying, he smiled, "You're in a very inquiring frame of mind today, surely." This is him because Marietta was just genuinely asking about things, trying to inquire about things. And this kind of annoyed me because Richard seems to underestimate women, or at least not pay them their due in intelligence, which is a big difference I'm coming to see between Lymond and Richard. Lymond knows that women are as smart as men, sometimes in many ways more dangerous, and he treads lightly around intelligent women. So I was definitely annoyed on my behalf and Marietta's behalf at just kind of that side comment of, oh, well, what do you mean I'm inquiring? Is that not something that that a young woman can do. Lymond probably never would have said that. He would have just realised that he would have had a conversation with any woman at the same level as a man. And I feel like Richard isn't quite the same as Lymond in that arena. And that's also accentuated again in the middle of page 263, where Richard's like, well, you can't come and come into politics, and Lymond knows very well that women are monsters in the political arena just the same as men. There is very little difference there. Richard is like a bull in a china shop, just coming in and just making things worse in so many ways. And we see that Mariota tries, also on page 263. She was determined not to be childish. She was determined not to refer to the child, to his pride and his livestock, to any of the hurtful things that ran daily through her mind. So Mariota, she's been like replaying conversations that she wants to have with Richard over and over in her head, and she's finally getting to them. And she's been trying to tell herself, don't do that. And she's tried, we appreciate that. And then she's proud when she finally, reveals to Richard about these jewels from Lymond, proud that she's finally got some emotion out of Richard, and then realizes, okay, Richard is a really tall, big, strong man and I'm cornered. And then she is scared. I was actually surprised, top of page 265 though, when Richard was like, Lymond is your lover. I was like, whoa, no, that's not what I was thinking. But Richard's went straight there, which really says a lot about Richard. His neurotic ideas about what his brother would do. But yeah, Mariota's very naive. She says she doesn't, page 265, she'd meant to hurt him and she'd meant to force him outside his defences, but now she doesn't recognise what she's actually done. She's handled this terribly, she now realises, and Richard is very upset, and it's more confronting than what she expected. I mean, what did she expect though, seriously? I felt for Mariota though when she said, bottom of 266, so she can't prove that Lymond isn't her lover, and then she says, you're both Crawfords and you're both Scots, the one alien to me as the other, except that one of you has a way with women and the other has not. Believe what you like. I felt really sad that, she is in an alien nation to her, and she's just married someone she probably didn't know. By the sounds of it, this was an arranged marriage and she didn't know Richard beforehand with what she said. It would be hard for her in many ways. On page 267, Richard's saying, I will bring him, Lymond, to you on his knees and weeping and begging aloud to be killed. I totally want to see this. I want to see this. That's it's a very intense thing to say, Richard. A very intense thing to say. He doesn't just want his brother dead, he wants his brother repenting. Let's just say that I agree with George Douglas. It would be fun to control Lymond. That's all. We don't need the weeping and the begging. But on his knees with a collar is totally fine. So then we've got fighting. The Whartons don't succeed in what they're trying to do. The English are forced back. The English lose, essentially. Margaret Lennox is gone. Oh, the biggest thing. John Maxwell sided with the Scots, and because of that, they've won. And this is Lymond's doing. So, I mean, Lymond won this battle. Again, just like he did with the cattle in the a few chapters ago. Lymond is on Scotland's side. But it can't be that simple. There is more to it. Okay. Page 270, let me just draw your attention to this. Is there anything more terrifying that could possibly happen when you're just chilling, reading a book in your room, and Lymond pops the door open, puts his head in and says, bored? Don't say yes. Don't say yes. That is the most loaded thing. Anything that starts with Lymond saying, are you bored, is probably not going to end in anything other than mischief. Lymond is so... He's brimming with energy because they've got Margaret Douglas. And the funniest line here, also on page 270. So Lymond is offering Will to watch him and Margaret Douglas at a later time that evening. What is going through Will's head? And he's like, God knows why, it should be left to me to educate you, but I feel in all fairness you ought to be equipped for life. This is what Lymond is saying to Will. So what is he educating Will on the... Like, let's unpack this. Lymond totally loves being a mentor to Will, 100%. But what is going through Will's head? What went through my head was that Lymond is going to seduce Margaret. They are going to have sexy times and Will is going to be watching like a voyeur. This is my initial thought. I promise I am not lying. But I know that can't be it because I know this is not like a romance book. It's the same time, like back at the Ostrich Inn when Will is dragged upstairs by Lymond to one of the private rooms, is Will thinking, are we gonna, like, does Lymond wanna, or is there gonna be a woman? Like there was a moment when I was reading at the Ostrich Inn and I was like, Lymond is taking Will to a private room. There are multiple reasons for this, and one of them is that he could be wanting to get with Will. I know that isn't true, but it went through my head. I'm sure it is going through Will's head. Will really admires Lymond. Anyway, back to the current scene. Lymond also adds in mildly. Oh my god. He's buzzing with energy, but he manages to speak mildly. Enjoy yourself, he says. Oh my goodness. This was just such an exciting read. I think I was trying to cook dinner and I was like, there is no way I can cook dinner when I'm about to see a scene where Lymond is going to potentially seduce King Henry VIII's niece. It's not happening. One does not just focus on life when that is going through your head. Oh my gosh. Scott tried to read. See, he could not concentrate after Lymond had said this to him. He tried to read, but he was just waiting. He couldn't concentrate either. See, we are just like Will. Us readers are Will deep down. At least I am anyway. Let's ignore that. Amazing exposition here. The hills and the half-mined valleys outside lay quiet in the dripping darkness. You could hear the fire crack next door and see the resulting flare through his own near-shut door. You can imagine this scene so vividly. It is just so brilliant. Like, Lymond radiates energy whenever Meg Douglas is around. He becomes electrified and buzzing. It is very dangerous. That is not good. So anyway, from 271 onwards, we have what is definitely my favourite scene of the book so far, which is Lymond and Margaret. They are two peas in a pod. They are made for each other. They are both equally manipulative, equally good at lying and reading the other person, equally trying to seduce each other sexually, politically, and also equally are trying to figure out how they can use the other person in a way that is definitely not to their advantage, or to the other person's advantage. And I honestly didn't know how it was going to end. I was thinking, are they going to make up and get back together? What is going to happen here? But yeah, these two are made for each other, and the subtext of what they are saying is so subtle and beautiful, and there is just no way I'm ever going to be able to read any romance and think it is more subtle than what I've just read on these few pages in 273 onwards. For example, bottom of 271, Lymond saying, "What else should I want you for?" And then basically going on to insult Matthew, Lennox, her husband, and she kind of defends Matthew, but then in her next breath, like a few moments later, completely pushes him away as if she never cared about him, and says that she wants to run away with Lymond. Very consistent, Margaret, very. And what's really interesting is that Lymond is saying, wanting Margaret's son, didn't know she had a son, for trade to Scotland. So this is different because Lymond literally was saying to Will that he wants Margaret Douglas to exchange her for Samuel Harvey. And now he's saying that he wants to actually get her son, exchange her for a son for the benefit of Scotland. So Lymond is here putting Scotland above his own needs and desires, which is wild. Like, maybe he's thought more deeply about this and realised that this Margaret's son and having him gone is going to be better. But whatever he's thought, he's now changed his tune on how he's going to get Samuel Harvey. Like, he's putting Scotland before himself, or what he wants with his own revenge. I honestly think that I would pay a lot of money to be where Will was in this position. Front row seats to this kind of multi-level manipulation that also happens to be beautiful in the firelight. That's not fair. Will, give us some of that. So now I know what happened. Like, I didn't know at the time when I was reading, but obviously Lymond had zero intention of ever making friends with Margaret and or like making up with her. He was just trying to see how much he could push her to get what he wanted, and then when he realized he couldn't get what he wanted, he was like, well, screw this. But what we've got is essentially, at one point, Margaret starts crying, especially when her son was mentioned, and I can't help but think she could genuinely be crying because she's worried for her son, but she wasn't, because she knew that she had the trump card of the fact that Mariotta is captured. So why was she crying here? Like, is she putting the tears on just to manipulate Lymond? Like, she is a master of this. And she's probably genuinely scared of Lymond at this point, considering she knows what she's done. I'm assuming that she had some hand in betraying Lymond, despite her not admitting to it, and Lymond is probably very aware of that fact, and she knows that Lymond is extremely... I have to call him Francis here because she calls him Francis. She knows that Francis is really smart, and so she's probably crying as well because she's got all of this nervous energy that she needs to expel, as well as the fact that she's just been captured and is scared. So she's probably using that just to put it on a bit. Lymond is 100% not fooled by her tears. And she's quite inconsistent. She sort of flip-flops between defending her own position as to not having betrayed Lymond and saying, no, don't worry about it. Why would we worry about it? It's fine. Just let's run away. Like, there's a bit of back and forth here. And then when she thinks she's finally pulling Lymond in, she keeps like doubling down on let's run away together, come on. And Lymond plays into this. I was fooled by both of them. I could not tell what was real and what wasn't. And the funny thing is that I think a lot of this would have been real, because there's probably still a lot of remembered emotions and sensations that they would have together if they were previously together, if they were previously lovers or whatever. So there's all of this is going to be going around in their heads whilst they're talking. Oh my God, but some lines of these were just so intense. If the king, this is 274, she turned to face him. Then if the king was responsible, I am his niece. Take what revenge you want. Oh my gosh. And Lymond's like, what about Matthew? What's Matthew except one step to a double, perhaps triple throne? True nature revealed. I do wonder what was going through Lymond's head when they were kissing and when he was touching her, because he was obviously, must have been very repulsed by her. Yet he hides it so perfectly well, because I certainly couldn't tell. I think it was cute how like Margaret realizes that Francis is like, would be a very good ally if they were still allies. You know, Francis, with your mind, your imagination, your leadership. And it's true, whatever has happened here. So yeah, Margaret also saw the scars on his hands and on his back. Oh my goodness. So now what I've made sense of is that Lymond betrayed Scotland somehow, was taken in at the Battle of Solway Moss, then kept on betraying Scotland, and fell in with Margaret and Lennox at the time and was really close with them. We know that Lennox has at some point saved Francis's life. Not sure where that is, waiting to figure out what that is. But he then became close with them, they took him in, and then at that point, sometime later, a convent was destroyed. Lymond may or may not have done it, but at least everyone thinks that he was the one who did it. And then he was sent over to France for his protection by Margaret, by someone in England, and then accidentally, whilst in France, fell into French hands rather than remaining in English hands in France, became a galley slave. Somehow he has escaped and survived being a galley slave, and then he's come back. Or maybe he was traveling around Europe for a while before he came back to England and then Scotland. So there's still a lot we don't know that happened in this time. Anyway, page 276, when Lymond finally says, "Shall I come?" "God, no, darling. I like my sluts honest." Was very badass. Loved it. Didn't like him using the word slut, but I will overlook it for now because Margaret is, in my opinion, not the most morally angelic type of person. Talking about this scene is really hard because I was so engrossed in the chemistry between Lymond and Margaret, and talking about it now is just not going to do it justice, but there was just so much between them. Even like top of 276, "Do you want me, Margaret?" at Temple Newsman. Margaret's like, "Yes, come away tonight. We'll figure it out." Lymond agrees, so Margaret has literally now agreed to basically take Lymond over her husband, and then of course Lymond's like, well, why is he going to trust someone who betrays someone just like that? This is once again why I think Lymond really values loyalty and honesty, and so Margaret is on the bottom of his list. My thoughts is that Lymond just wanted to see how far he could push Margaret to agree to taking him back before he shoved her back. And basically, yeah, like Lymond got her to the point where she agreed to basically dump her husband, take Lymond back, try to fix everything. I don't think Lymond believed it for a second that any of it could be true, but the fact that he was able to do that says a lot about Margaret's character, but also Margaret, two things. She would have been scared, 100%. And also, two, she should never have been too scared because she always knew that she had Mariota. So this whole time, she did have this trump card which would protect her, that she knew, and she never used it until the very end, when Lymond basically turned on her and she realised that she couldn't use emotions and her body to get him back on her side. And then they have a little domestic. Margaret accuses Lymond of having a high sex drive. I've never heard of this word. Satyriasis. Lymond's like, "I can't help it." That was just so weird. Lymond and Margaret cannot help but be attracted to each other because they see the worst traits they know that they have in the other person. Because they both share the same bad traits, and they can see it reflected back at them when they are with each other, and neither of them are very good at stomaching it. But they cannot help but be drawn to it. I've come across these lines frequently, lines that I predict will sum up all of Lymond, and I've got one here on page 278 that he actually says himself out loud. He didn't look up but continued to write quickly and fluently. "I prefer to be my own butcher." 100%. Lymond doesn't care about a lot of things that happen to him, but he wants control over them because, once again, he's got a thing for control. He wants to make sure that if something happens that he had a say in it, and that it was by his own hand, and he hates it when things happen to him based on what other people do. Another really cool line is top of 280. Lymond warned impassively, "Make an end, Margaret. My patience can outlast your dignity." That's just really funny, to be honest. That Margaret would keep going like this all night and Lymond would happily just sit there. Not happily, but he would be patient about it. Margaret in this moment was so much trying. I think leading up to this was, 279 to 280. She was really trying to make him snap. She, kind of like Mariota was trying to get with Richard, she wanted Lymond to just snap. She wanted a reaction out of him more than what she got. She wanted to sort of roll around in her victory a little bit more, and Lymond was just like, "You will get nothing out of me except basically losing your own dignity with how much you are trying to get something out of me." Here's my analysis on Margaret is that both Lymond and Margaret hate and love each other, right? I think there is a little bit of guilt in Margaret's soul as to what happened to Francis. And what Margaret is trying to do is that she is trying to set up Lymond as the bad person to kind of justify her not feeling guilty, because she doesn't want to feel guilty. So she was trying to get a rise out of Lymond, maybe trying to get Lymond to hurt her so that she could justify not feeling guilty. So that she's like, oh yeah, no, I don't have to feel guilty about this person. This person is a bad person. And when Lymond said, basically, my patience will outlast your dignity, she realized the reminder brought her to herself. The wildness faded from her eyes. I will say this entire thing though, and Will was watching this, there were so many opportunities that he could have said to make himself look better in front of Will, but he never did. Why did Lymond want Will to watch this? I think it was because he wanted Will to see that women are highly capable of being manipulators. Because Will had previously, you know, said, I would rather cut my hand off than hurt a woman. And Lymond is just saying, well, let me just show you what monsters a woman also can be. Because Lymond said he wanted to educate Will. So I think, you know, Margaret Douglas is a very good educational tool for any young man who thinks all women are angels. And then Will getting locked out of the room and like trying to get back in was just so hilarious. And Matt is just like, bro, don't go there. Bro, don't. Also this entire scene where Will is like trying to justify why he wants to come back in so he can get into his room and go to sleep. And he's like, well, I want to be in my own bed, you know? And he's just standing outside the door trying to yell this in. And then this is top of page 282. I want to go to bed in my own... Scott, finding the ring of this a little undignified, revised it. Open the door. He's just like... Lymond is so funny how he's trying to make Will justify why he wants his own bed while standing outside his door. When Will finally gets in, Lymond loses his sword and then doesn't pick it back up and basically has said, look after it. If you let me touch it a second time, I shall kill. And then later in that page in 283, when it's revealed that Scott is actually quite pissed off at Lymond, the blue eyes narrowed in response. Lymond was no fool. Well, he said, and this time his voice had no slur. So Lymond was putting on being more drunk than he was at the beginning. Will was like, oh my god, Lymond's drunk, this is not good. And then Will's like, oh, he's not drunk, this is really bad. Quote, page 284, that also sums up Lymond and so many of us. I am as sane now as I shall ever be, said Lymond grimly. But this whole thing where he literally offers Will to take over control of his entire group through a drinking game. Will was like, well, this can't be. Will actually thought he had a chance. I thought Will had a chance. I was so wrong. And it was just so funny because Will was like, well, no, drinking game to take over this, the group doesn't seem very honorable. How about we, you know, actually have a proper fight? And Lymond's like, no, I'm too much your master there, my sweet one. I'm sorry. Like, Lymond's like, the only way that Will has a chance is probably through drinking. And even then, Lymond knows Will has no chance. But every other way, like wrestling or fighting, Lymond definitely would have won. It's just so funny. It's just... everything that Will does, Lymond is just kind of in his head making fun of Will. And again, here we go, with Lymond not defending himself. Will is basically saying, what's going to happen when Mariota arrives? Like, the men are going to have their way with him. And Lymond is just like being all bored, being like, meh, like whatever. When we find out that actually he does make arrangements to make sure that she's protected, but he just doesn't ever defend himself in front of Will. He actually just actively keeps digging his own grave with his reputation in front of Will. Lymond, you could look so much better in front of Will. The scene description on page 285 of the sunrise coming up was just so beautiful. High on the hilltops among the wet scrub by the burn, a blackbird was singing, very beautiful. Just, it's so nice to get these refreshing scenes. We've just had this really intense couple of scenes with Will and then Margaret, and then to have this is nice. And how we didn't know who was walking down the stairs as to who won the drinking game to be the leader of the men. Like, we didn't get that until like after words had been spoken. It's just so, I was like, who is it? Of course it was Lymond. And then Lymond goes out makes arrangements with Matt to make sure that Mariota is all good. And then he leaves and he's like, get my horse, Matt, will you? And my bow and a blanket and some clothes. And Matt does all of this. But then Matt also brings some food back and he's like, there's some food in the bag, said Turkey aggressively, as in, please make sure you eat, Lymond. Matt is so concerned. Oh my gosh. So that was page 286. And also Matt was concerned about Will because Matt knew that Will had gone up to see Lymond in his 3-day drunk stupor that apparently he does on the regular whenever things don't go his way. It's so funny how Matt's just like, that's what Lymond does when he's pissed off. We just don't go near him. I think Matt was genuinely concerned that maybe something had happened to Will because he'd been disturbed. But yeah, because he's like, Matt was not prone to ask questions, but the event was too much for him. Matt cared about Will. He really did. And then obviously Will is totally fine. Once again, Lymond, he pulled the blanket over Will before after they'd previously argued. And now with this argument, Lymond also had made sure that Will has like a basin right next to him so that he's ready to wake up and vomit into it. Oh my God. It's just the juxtaposition of how terrible Lymond is verbally to a person to then the small little nice actions he does for them could not be more different. Anyway, that chapter was a really intense and long chapter, and it's definitely such a big chapter. I will see you next time.